This situation just took a turn nobody expected, and it's getting way more complicated than people thought. Because what started as a simple podcast moment has now turned into a full-blown father-son controversy between T.I. and King Harris. And trust me, the internet is not letting this go. It all began when T.I. casually said something that didn't seem like a big deal at first, but the way it came out, it changed everything. During a public conversation, he revealed that King would ask him for $100,000 like it was nothing. And the second that clip hit social media, it spread fast. Within hours, people were reacting, calling King spoiled, calling him entitled, questioning how someone could casually ask for six figures like it's pocket change. And just like that, the narrative was set. But here's where things take a serious turn. Because weeks later, King Harris responded, and what he said? It completely flipped the story. According to King, he wasn't asking for money to spend. He was asking for investment, for business, for opportunities, for growth. Now suddenly, this isn't about a spoiled kid anymore. This is about a young man saying, I'm building something, and I expected support. And that changes everything. Because now people aren't just asking, why is he asking for $100,000? They're asking, why did T.I. present it that way? And here's the part that really got people talking. Because right after all of this went public, there were claims that T.I. had started pulling back financially, cutting support due to behavior he didn't agree with. Now, the situation feels different, because this isn't just about money anymore. It's about respect, about perception, about a father going public, and a son feeling exposed. So now the internet is split. Some people are saying T.I. is teaching responsibility. Others are saying King just got thrown under the bus in front of millions. But the real question is this: did King Harris just expose the truth about what's really going on behind the scenes? Or is this just a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Because once you see what really happened next, this situation goes from uncomfortable to completely explosive. To really understand why this situation blew up the way it did, you have to go back, because this wasn't just about one comment. This was building for a while. The relationship between T.I. and King Harris has always been in the public eye. Not just because of music, but because people have literally watched this family grow up. From reality TV to interviews, fans feel like they know them. And that's exactly why this hit so hard. Because when something personal gets said publicly, it doesn't stay personal. It becomes content. It becomes debate. It becomes judgment. Now here's where things start getting layered. King Harris didn't grow up like the average person. He grew up as the son of a hip-hop icon, a household name, a man who built not just a music career, but a business empire. And with that kind of upbringing comes expectations, pressure, and constant comparison. But at the same time, King hasn't just been sitting back. He's been trying to build his own path. Music, media, business, he's been active, visible, trying to step out of his father's shadow while still being connected to it. And that's not easy, because every move he makes gets compared to T.I. Every success gets measured differently. Every mistake gets amplified. Now add money into that equation, and things get even more complicated, because this isn't just about asking your dad for help. This is about generational wealth, access, opportunity, and what support is supposed to look like when your father has the resources to change your entire future. And that's where the tension starts. Because according to what surfaced publicly, T.I. didn't just mention the $100,000 request, he compared King to his other children, saying they don't even want money. They refuse it. Now think about that for a second. That's not just a comment, that's a comparison. And when you do that publicly, it creates a narrative. One child looks independent, the other looks dependent. One looks disciplined, the other looks entitled. Even if that wasn't the intention, that's how it was received. And once the internet gets that narrative, it runs with it. Fast. Now here's the key detail that changed everything, because for about 3 weeks, that's exactly how people saw King. As the son asking for money, as the one leaning too heavily on his father, Has the example of privilege gone too far? But then King spoke. And when he didn't just defend himself. He reframed the entire situation. He made it clear that he wasn't asking for money to spend. He was asking for capital, for investment, for business opportunities. And that's a completely different conversation, because now this isn't about entitlement. This is about perspective. T.I. might see it as, my son keeps asking me for large amounts of money. But King sees it as, I'm trying to build something, and I'm going to the person who has the resources. And both of those perspectives can exist at the same time. But when they clash publicly, it creates tension, and that tension becomes visible. Now let's add another layer, because this didn't happen in isolation. This happened right after one of the most intense public moments involving the Harris family, the feud with 50 Cent. And King? He was right in the middle of it, defending his family, going at one of the biggest names in the industry, taking risks publicly, even pushing boundaries that T.I. himself had to step in and address. So now you've got a son who's fighting publicly for his family, trying to build his own identity, and navigating expectations at the same time. And then, weeks later, his father goes on a podcast and frames him in a way that makes him look entitled. That's where the emotional part comes in. Because from the outside, it looks like a simple money conversation. But from the inside, it feels like something else. It feels like respect, support, recognition. And that's why King's response didn't feel casual. It felt necessary, like he had to correct the narrative before it stuck permanently. Because once the internet labels you something, it's hard to shake. And that's exactly what was happening. So now we're in a situation where a father speaks openly about his frustration, a son responds to protect his image, and the public is caught in the middle trying to figure out who's right. But here's the real question that hasn't been answered yet. Did T.I. actually cut off financial support? Or did he just change how he supports his son? Because depending on that answer, this story could mean something completely different. And trust me, what comes next? That's where things really start to heat up. This is where everything really started to spiral. Because what looked like a simple misunderstanding between T.I. and King Harris suddenly turned into something much bigger, much more personal, and way more public than it probably should have been. It all comes back to that one moment. That one statement, when T.I. I went on that podcast and casually said that King would ask him for $100,000 like it was nothing. Now on the surface, it sounded like a joke. A father talking about his son in a light, almost amused way. But the internet didn't hear it like that. They heard entitlement, privilege. A young man depending too much on his father. And once that perception took hold, there was no slowing it down. People started dragging King hard, calling him spoiled, saying he didn't understand the value of money, questioning his work ethic. And suddenly, his entire image started shifting. Fast. But here's where the conflict really hits. Because while all of this was happening publicly, King was watching, seeing the narrative being built around him. And according to what surfaced, he didn't stay quiet. He responded. And that response, that's the first twist that flipped everything. Because instead of denying the $100,000 request, he explained it. He clarified that he wasn't asking for money to spend. He was asking for investment capital. Now that's a completely different situation. Because asking your father for money to blow, that's one thing. But asking for capital to build something? That's business. That's strategy. That's long-term thinking. And the moment he said that, everything changed. Now the internet had to reconsider because suddenly King didn't look like someone begging for money. He looked like someone trying to leverage his resources, trying to build, trying to grow. And that raises a much bigger question. Why didn't T.I. mention that part? Because according to what we've seen, when he told the story publicly, he left that detail out. And that omission, it matters. Because without that context, the story looks one way. With that context, it looks completely different. And that's where the tension between father and son becomes real. Because now it feels like two different perspectives colliding. T.I.'s perspective: my son keeps asking me for large amounts of money. King's perspective: I'm trying to build something and I need capital. Neither one is necessarily wrong, but when those perspectives get shared publicly without alignment, it creates conflict, and that conflict becomes visible to millions of people. Now here's where things get even more intense. Because according to the transcript, there were also claims that T.I. started pulling back financial support, possibly as a response to behavior he didn't agree with. Now, that changes everything. Because if that's true, then this isn't just about how money is being asked for, it's about whether support is being taken away. And from King's perspective, that could feel like more than just a financial decision. It could feel personal. Like, I'm trying to build something, and now the support isn't there. Meanwhile, from T.I.'s perspective, it could be discipline, teaching independence, setting boundaries. And again, both perspectives can exist. But when they clash publicly, it turns into something bigger than either of them intended. Now let's add another layer to this. Because this whole situation didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened right after King had been very active publicly, especially during the feud involving 50 Cent. And King, he went all in, defending his family, speaking up, even crossing lines that T.I. himself had to step in and address. So now imagine this from King's point of view. You're defending your family publicly, you're standing up for your name, you're taking heat online, and then shortly after that, your father goes on a podcast and tells the world you ask for $100,000 like it's nothing. That hits different. And that's why his response didn't feel random. It felt necessary. Like he needed to take back control of his narrative. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about money. It's about image. And in today's world, your image is everything. But here's the part that makes this even more complicated. Because even after King clarified his side, the internet didn't fully switch. Some people supported him, others stayed critical. Because once a narrative is out there, it doesn't disappear, it evolves. And now we've got two competing narratives. One says, King is entitled and relies too much on his father. The other says, King is an entrepreneur trying to build and simply asking for investment. And the truth? It's probably somewhere in the middle. But here's the twist nobody is talking about yet. What if this situation isn't just about money? What if it's about expectations? Because when you're the son of someone like T.I., the expectations are different. Higher, heavier, and maybe that's where the real tension comes from. Not just what King is asking for, but what T.I. expects from him. And trust me, what happens next? That's where things go from complicated to completely explosive. Just when it felt like both sides had said what they needed to say, the situation escalated again, because this wasn't just staying between T.I. and King Harris anymore. It started spreading across social media, across interviews, across conversations about money, parenting, and what it really means to support your child when you have generational wealth. And that's when things got uncomfortable, because the more people looked at this situation, the more they realized it wasn't just about $100,000. It was about how that $100,000 was being framed. On one side, you had T.I.'s version, a father frustrated that his son casually asked for large amounts of money. On the other side, you had King's version, a son saying, I'm not asking to spend, I'm asking to build. And the gap between those two perspectives, that's where the real tension lives. But here's where things take a turn, because after King clarified his position, the people started going back to T.Y.'s original statement, and they noticed something. Something subtle, but important. Context was missing. I never explained what the money was for when he told the story publicly. He focused on the amount, the reaction, the comparison to his other kids, but not the purpose. And that omission? It changed how people saw everything. Because now, instead of asking, why is King asking for money? People started asking, why didn't T.I. explain the full story? And that question, it made the situation even more intense. Because now it wasn't just about King defending himself, it was about whether his image had been shaped unfairly, and trust me, once that idea hits the internet, it doesn't go away. Then came the shocking reveal that pushed everything further. Because according to what's being discussed, this situation might not be about cutting support completely. It might be about redefining it. Let that sink in. Because instead of T.I. stopped supporting King, the reality might be T.I. changed how he supports him. Less direct money, more expectations, more boundaries, more accountability. And if that's true, then this situation isn't a fallout, it's a transition. From father funding everything to son being expected to prove himself. But here's the problem with that transition. It wasn't handled privately, it happened in public, on a podcast, in front of millions, and that's what made it explosive. Because moments like that, they're supposed to be conversations, not content. And once it became content, it became something else entirely, something that people could react to, judge, debate. And that's exactly what happened. Meanwhile, King's response didn't just clarify his intentions. It exposed the disconnect. Because when he said he goes to his father for investment capital instead of going to a bank, he revealed how he sees the relationship, not just as father and son, but as investor and builder. And that's a completely different dynamic. Because in business, you don't just give money, you evaluate, you question, you expect returns. And maybe that's where T.I. is coming from. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because people started connecting this situation to everything that happened just before it. The public feud, the way King defended his family, the risks he took, the attention he brought, and now, weeks later, this conversation about money hits the public, and it creates a completely different image. That timing, it raised questions. Because from King's perspective, it could feel like, I stood up for the family, and this is how I'm being presented. While from T.I.'s perspective, it might be, I need to set boundaries before things go too far. And again, both perspectives can be true. But when they collide publicly, it creates friction. And that friction turns into a story. Now here's the part that really makes this situation complicated. Because even after all the explanations, clarifications, and debates, nothing has been fully resolved. There's no clear statement saying, yes, support was cut off. Or no, everything is fine. Instead, there's space, ambiguity, and in that space, the internet fills in the blanks. Some say T.I. is teaching independence. Others say King is being misunderstood. Some say this is tough love. Others say it's public embarrassment. And the truth? It's still unclear. But that uncertainty? That's what keeps the story alive. Because as long as there are unanswered questions, people will keep watching, keep analyzing, keep waiting, and right now, it feels like we're right before the next big moment. Because situations like this don't just fade away. They evolve, they escalate. They reach a point where something new drops, and everything shifts again. So now the real question is, what happens next? Does T.I. clarify his position? Does King respond again? Or does something else come out that changes the narrative completely? Because, trust me, this story isn't finished, not even close. At this point, this isn't just a family conversation anymore. It's a full-blown internet debate, and everybody has something to say. The moment the situation between T.I. and King Harris went viral, social media didn't just react, it exploded. We're talking clips reposted everywhere, millions of views, comment sections going crazy, and the narrative splitting into two completely different directions. On one side, people are backing T.I. hard. This is parenting. He's teaching discipline. You don't just hand out $100,000 even if you have it. He's raising him to be independent, not dependent. To these people, T.I. isn't wrong. He's doing what a father is supposed to do, setting boundaries even if it looks harsh from the outside. They see it as tough love, necessary, especially when you're dealing with generational wealth. Because from their perspective, if you make things too easy, you create entitlement. But on the other side, the support for King is just as loud. He said it's for investments. That's not the same thing. Why put that out publicly without context? He's trying to build something and got painted the wrong way. These voices believe King got misunderstood, and more importantly, misrepresented. Because when that original clip dropped, nobody knew the full story. They just heard $100,000. And they judged. Fast. Now that King has clarified his side, people are going back and rethinking everything. And that's what's making this situation even more intense. Because now the debate isn't just who's right, it's who told the full story. Meanwhile, the conversation has gone way beyond just these two. Industry voices have started chiming in, some directly, some indirectly. You've got people talking about generational wealth, about how kids of wealthy parents should be supported, about whether family money should be treated like investment capital or something completely separate. One creator said, if your dad has the resources, why wouldn't you go to him first? Another fired back, because if you can't build it without him, then is it really yours? And just like that, this turned into a much bigger conversation. Not just about King, not just about T.I., but about money, privilege, and expectations. Even fans who don't follow the Harris family closely are weighing in now, because this situation feels relatable, just on a much bigger scale. Everyone has an opinion on what a parent should do, what a child should expect, where the line between support and independence should be drawn. And that's why this story is sticking, because it's not just celebrity drama. It's something people can apply to their own lives. But here's the part that has everyone on edge. Despite all the debate, all the takes, all the analysis, nothing has been fully settled. I hasn't gone back and clarified everything. King hasn't dropped another detailed response. And that silence? It's creating tension, because people are waiting for the next move, waiting for one of them to say something that either confirms or shuts down the narrative completely. And until that happens, the conversation isn't slowing down, it's growing. Because every day that passes without a clear resolution, more opinions form, more sides are taken, more pressure builds. And right now, it feels like we're right on the edge of something bigger. Because situations like this don't just fade quietly, they either calm down or they explode again. And based on how this has been going, it doesn't feel like it's calming down. It feels like it's building. So now the question is, who's going to speak next? And when they do, what are they going to say? Because whatever comes next, it might change how this entire situation is seen. Just when it feels like the entire situation has already been broken down from every angle, there's one twist that changes how you look at everything. Because this story was never really about $100,000, not fully. It was about something deeper. Something most people didn't catch at first. Because if you step back and really look at the situation between T.I. and King Harris, there's a bigger pattern, a shift from father to mentor, from support to expectation. And that changes everything. Because what if T.I. didn't just randomly talk about King on that podcast? Yeah, what if that moment was intentional? Not to embarrass him, but to send a message. Publicly. Let that sink in. Because sometimes when things aren't getting through privately, people switch the approach. They make it visible. They make it undeniable. And if that's what happened here, then that podcast moment wasn't just a story. It was a signal, a turning point. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because from King's perspective, that same moment could feel like something completely different. Not a lesson, not guidance, but exposure. Because imagine trying to build your own identity, trying to step out of your father's shadow, and then the world hears a version of you that doesn't include the full context. that hits different. And that's why his response felt so sharp, so direct, so necessary. Because he wasn't just correcting a misunderstanding, he was protecting his image. And in today's world, that matters just as much as the truth itself. But here's the twist nobody can ignore. Both of them might be right, at the same time. I might genuinely feel like he needs to set boundaries, to push his son toward independence, to make sure he earns his own success. And King might genuinely feel like he's doing exactly that. By seeking investment, by trying to build, by using the resources available to him. And that's where the real conflict lives, not in the money, but in the interpretation. But just when it feels like we finally understand the situation, there's one more detail that changes everything. Because according to what's being discussed, this might not be the end of the conversation. It might be the beginning. Because now that this has gone public, there's pressure. On both sides, pressure to respond, pressure to clarify, pressure to either double down or smooth things out. And that pressure, it doesn't just disappear, it builds. Because the longer this sits unresolved, the more people talk, the more narratives form, the more expectations rise. And eventually, something has to give. Either T.I. comes back and explains his full perspective, or King steps in again with more details, or something new comes out that shifts everything. And based on how fast this situation escalated, that next moment might come sooner than people expect. Because right now, it feels like we're in the middle of the story, not the end. And the next move is going to define how this entire situation is remembered. So now the real question is this. Is this a father teaching his son a lesson? Or a son exposing a side of the story we weren't supposed to see? Because depending on what happens next, that answer could change completely, and trust me, you're going to want to see it when it does. Now, after everything you just heard, I need you to be real. Because this situation between T.I. and King Harris isn't simple at all. It's not just about money. It's not just about parenting. It's about perspective. So, let me ask you, what do you think really happened here? Do you believe T.I. was right for putting his foot down and setting boundaries, even if it meant calling things out publicly? Or do you think King Harris had every right to speak up, especially if he felt like the full story wasn't being told? Because that's what this really comes down to. Why, not just who's right, but who told the truth. And more importantly, who told the full story. I want you to go down to the comments right now and pick a side. Don't sit on the fence. Are you riding with T.I. or are you backing King? And make sure you explain why. Because this debate is deeper than it looks, and the comment section on this one is about to go crazy. And listen, if you think this situation was intense, you're not ready for what's coming next. Because stories like this don't just disappear, they evolve. New details come out. New perspectives get revealed. And sometimes, the biggest twist comes after everyone thinks it's over. So make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because the moment anything new drops about this situation, we're breaking it down immediately. No delays. No missing details, just the full story right here. Stay locked in, because this drama, it's far from over.